No man had less left to spend than Caleb Hayes until the hammer went up in the Silver Ridge Square. He rode in that Tuesday with 14 head of cattle and $347 in a leather bag, and that was everything he owned in the world. 15 miles behind him sat at a house patched with wood where the mud had burned away, and 3 flat stones under a cottonwood he never pointed out to anyone. So why did he carry his father's silver pocket watch and a fire-warped gold band against his ribs, the 2 things he had sworn for 5 years were never for selling? They were all that remained of a 16-year-old sister who never came home. Before that summer of 1850 ended, both were titled to a pawnbroker's scale. The summer of 1850 came to New Mexico territory the way an old wound reopens. Slow, steady, cruel in its familiarity, the land had changed hands only 2 years back, when the treaty signed at Guadalupe Hidalgo redrew the map and left men like Caleb Hayes standing on soil that used to belong to Mexico and now belonged to nobody in particular. That was the thing about borders. They moved, but the dust never noticed. Caleb rode into Silver Ridge that Tuesday with 14 head of cattle and a jaw set hard as the flint in his saddlebag. 32 years old, sun-worn, a man built out of long silences and longer roads. His hat brim threw a shadow across eyes the color of riverstone, and under that hat thoughts he did not share 5 years. That was the length of his grief, measured in seasons. 5 years since he came back from selling cattle in Tucson and found the ranch smoke blackened. The door of his mother's kitchen kicked in, his father face down in the corral, gone before help could reach him, and Sarah, his little sister Sarah, 16 years old and full of laughter that used to fill the whole valley. They took her too. Bandits out of Sonora, the marshal had said, riding north through the chaos of the post-war borderlands, taking what they wanted because nobody had drawn the new lines tight enough to stop them yet. Have you ever come home to a house that no longer holds anyone you love? Have you ever stood in your own doorway and felt like the trespasser? Caleb had, and he had never quite left that doorway since. He had rebuilt what he could, the corral first, then the section of roof that had burned through above the front room, then the fence line along the south stretch, 1 post at a time, because working alone means you finish nothing quickly and everything eventually. He had done it without help. He had done it without prayer. He had done it because the alternative was to sit on the porch step and let the wind whittle him down to a memory of himself. Was, some days, what he did anyway. The road into Silver Ridge climbed out of red rock country and dropped into a shallow bowl where the town had been laid down with no plan and less ambition. Peon smoke drifted from 3 chimneys. A mule stood tied to the water trough with its head down and its ears twitching at flies. A boy of about 10 sat on a barrel outside the general store, whittling a stick into nothing in particular, and he looked up as Caleb rode past and did not wave. Caleb did not wave back. That was not unfriendliness. That was just the code of a country where a wave cost you nothing and could still be misread. He tied his gelding at the rail outside Peterson's. He loosened the cinch a notch. He took the leather bag of cattle money off the saddle horn and tucked it inside his coat. Because a man who leaves money on a horse in a border town is a man who no longer expects to live long. And Caleb, whatever else he was, expected to live long, or long enough. Long enough for what? He had not decided. The town square smelled like axle grease and pig fat, and the particular sourness that comes from too many bodies pressed together in July heat. Silver Ridge was not much of a town, a general store, a saloon that pretended to be a hotel, a blacksmith who doubled as coroner because the 2 jobs were more connected than folks like to admit, and in the middle of it all, the auction block, rough pine boards, a red-painted rail, a wooden hammer that had been sold to too many men. Caleb had come for cattle prices, nothing more. He walked past the auction block without looking at it. That was the plan. That was always the plan. The auctions in Silver Ridge sold horses and mules on good weeks and human beings on bad ones, and Caleb had made a private rule 5 years back that he would not stand in a crowd to watch either, because a man's soul is thinned by what he watches without stopping. His mother had told him that once. He had believed her. He still did, except the crowd was thick that morning, thicker than a cattle auction crowd. And the murmur running through it was not the murmur of men waiting on a price. It was the murmur of men waiting on something else, something that made the back of Caleb's neck warm before he had figured out why. He kept walking. He was almost past. Then he heard the auctioneer's voice climb up over the crowd. Prisoners of war, Chiricahua band, attack in March, sold legal and a territorial custom. Bidding opens at 300. Do I hear 300? Caleb stopped. He did not mean to stop. His boots stopped for him. There is a way that a man's body knows what a man's mind has not yet admitted, and Caleb's body had already turned back toward the block before his mind had caught up to the reason. He walked into the crowd. He shouldered through it. He was tall enough that he did not need to press. Men moved aside for him the way they move aside for a stranger whose face they cannot read. He came to a stop at the front edge of the crowd. He looked up, and that was when the world he had been living in for 5 years quietly rearranged itself into a different world without his permission. 2 women stood on the auction block, a patch, both of them, and tall. God in heaven, they were tall, near 7 feet each, standing shoulder to shoulder with their chins lifted the way pines lift toward weather. The older one wore a duskin dress that had seen fire and river and horse-sweet. The younger one held her ribs like they hurt her, though her face refused to admit it. Their wrists were shackled with iron, their ankles too, but their eyes had not been shackled, and that was the thing that stopped Caleb Hayes cold in the middle of a July square, holding a leather bag of cattle money he no longer remembered carrying. Because he had seen those eyes before, not on these women, on his sister Sarah. On the morning she watched him ride out toward Tucson and did not know it was the last time. That same held-back light, that same refusal to be broken by what was coming. His breath went out of him in a way he did not recognize. The auctioneer called again. 300. Do I hear 300? These are prime specimens, gentlemen. Healthy, strong. Do I hear 300? A voice from the middle of the crowd. 300. The auctioneer's hammer tipped up. 300 to the man in gray. Do I hear 350? A different voice from the front. A man in a linen suit that had cost more than a rancher makes in half a year. Sharp face, bad teeth, worse eyes. 350. The crowd stirred, because everyone in the square knew the man in the linen suit, and everyone in the square knew what happened to Apache women who were bought by men like that. It did not happen quickly, and it did not end well. The auctioneer beamed. 350 to Mr. Boone. Do I hear 400? A hesitation. The man in gray dropped out. Nobody else came in. Smiles. Caleb saw the older Apache woman shift. Not much. A 1/4 inch, maybe. But she shifted it in a way that put her body 1 degree closer to her sister. Closer, between her sister and Boone, and Caleb understood then what he was watching. He was watching a woman decide which of the men in our crowd she would kill first when the ropes came off. Because they would come off. She would make sure of it. Except she would not get the chance. Not with Boone. Boone would separate them the moment the money changed hands. Boone would have his own men. Boone would have chains that were harder than these chains, and rooms that were harder than any room the auctioneer had shown them yet. Something inside Caleb's chest did the thing it had not done since the morning he buried his family under 3 flat stones behind the ranch house. It cracked open, and through the crack came a voice that did not seem entirely his own. 500. The square went quiet. The auctioneer swung his head toward Caleb like a horse that has just heard a rattlesnake. 500. Do I have that right, sir? You do. You good for that, mister? Caleb nodded once. He was not good for that. He had, at that precise moment, $347 in the leather bag against his hip. Every coin of it earned from the cattle he had just sold. The rest of that 500 did not exist. Not in his pockets, not in his saddle, not on the whole of Hayes Ranch, except for the silver pocket watch on the chain against his ribs, his father's press, passed down from his grandfather in Kentucky. Before that, the one thing Caleb had pulled from his father's vest before he laid the man in the ground, and except for the plain gold band he kept in a small tin in his coat pocket, his mother's wedding ring, recovered from the ash where the kitchen used to be, warped a little by heat, still gold. 5 years he had carried both of them. 5 years he had told himself they were not for selling, that they were the last thread between him and the people who had made him. And now here he was, in a square that smelled like pig fat and grief, raising a hand for 2 women he did not know, because their eyes reminded him of a girl he had failed to protect. The auctioneer waited. The linen suit man narrowed his eyes and did not bid again. He could see what everyone in the square could see. This was a matter of something other than money now, sold to the man in the brown hat. For $500, the hammer fell, but nobody in that dusty square knew that the man raising his hand had just buried his family a second time. Caleb walked the watch and the ring across the square to Mordecai Finch's pawn window before he let us think about it too long. Finch had been buying dead men's memories for 20 years. He weighed the watch in his palm. He turned the ring in the sunlight. He named a price that was fair by his standards and cruel by any human measure. Caleb took the money without a word. He counted it into the auctioneer's palm along with his cattle earnings until the number climbed to 500 exactly. And when the auctioneer produced the shackle keys and the paper of sale, Caleb signed the paper without reading it. The paper called the women property. The paper was wrong. Boone was still standing at the edge of the block, watching, committing Caleb's face to a place in his memory where such get kept. Caleb did not meet his eyes, not out of fear, out of the understanding that a man like Boone remembers the men who cross him for as long as it takes to settle accounts. And Caleb had, as of this hour, put himself on that ledger. So be it. He turned. He led the sisters away from the block and toward his wagon on the edge of town. He walked them out through the crowd on foot, because the wagon he had come in with only had room for 2 on the bench, and he was not about to make a scene of who sat where. Folks parted for them. Some stared. Some crossed to the other side of the street the way people do when death walks past. One woman with a Bible in her hand actually spat at his boots. He did not stop. He did not answer. He walked, and behind him walked the Apache Sisters. Chains still on fluffed wrists because the auctioneer had only surrendered 1 key, and Caleb was still fumbling with it. They reached his wagon at the edge of town. He turned to the older sister first, because she was the one whose eyes had been counting exits since the moment the hammer fell. Nashota, that was her name on the paper of sale. 26 years old. Chiricahua, the younger. Dolly, 19, sister to Nashota. Same clan, same silence. He held up the key. I do not know the words in your tongue, he told them, his voice quieter than he meant it to be, but I want you to hear me plain in mine. This paper says I own you. This key says otherwise. I paid the money so the man with the bad teeth would not. Nashota watched him the way a hawk watches a rabbit that has done something unexpected. Dolly's eyes flicked to her sister and stayed there. Waiting, I have a ranch, Caleb went on. 15 miles out, water year-round, room enough for 3, if 3 is what we are. The choice is yours. Come with me and eat, or take the key and go where you want. I will not stop you either way. Nashota's gaze did not move from his face, and when she spoke, her English was slow but exact, the way a knife is exact at you paid. So by your people's law, we are yours. Caleb shook his head. That is not the law that raised me. Then whose law raised you? He thought about it, not long. Just enough to be honest, my mother's. And she is dead now. But she is still louder than the men who wrote the paper. Something in Nashota's face shifted. Not softness, she was not the softening kind, but something. A weight redistributed. She looked at Dolly. Dolly looked back. A whole conversation happened between them in the space of one breath, and Caleb understood he was not part of it and had no right to be. Then Nashota held out her wrists. He unlocked the shackles. First hers, then her sister's. The iron dropped into the dust with the dull clang of something that had been forged for a purpose it should never have served. Dolly rubbed her wrists once. Nashota did not. Nashota watched its hands the way a woman watches a stranger's hands near her child, which was fair, because they were, in that moment, strangers. He climbed into the wagon. He did not offer them a hand up. That would have been another mistake. They swat us beside him without needing it, and the wagon groaned under their weight the way old wood does when it remembers what it is capable of. He turned the team toward the red rock road that led out of Silver Ridge, and he did not look back at the square, because he knew what he would see. Boone, watching, making a note of the brown-hatted rancher who had spoiled his afternoon. And what Caleb could not know then, but would learn soon enough, was that men like Boone keep their notes for a long time. The road out of Silver Ridge climbed through a landscape that had not decided yet whether it was mountain or desert. Pinon and juniper on the slopes, rabbit brush in the washes, and overhead, a hawk turning slow circles the way hawks do when they know they have the whole day. 15 miles is a long ride when nobody is speaking. Nashota rode with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight as a rifle. Dolly's breathing was the only sound Caleb could hear over the creak of the wagon. And it was not right, that breathing. It caught, it stopped and started. Like a saw pulled through wet wood, he glanced at her sideways once. She did not meet his eyes. "You are hurt," not a question. Dolly's chin lifted, which was answer enough. "Ribs," Nashota answered for her. "When they took us," she fell from her horse. The bounty men roped her leg. American soldiers, no, not this time. Men out of Sonora, working for coin. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. "You know them." Her voice was neutral. "Just a question. Just information. I know the kind." They rode the rest of the way without saying more, but the silence between them was different now. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who had discovered they shared an enemy. Hayes Ranch sat in a red rock valley 3 ridges south of the road. Not much to look at from the top of the last rise. A low adobe house his father had built the year Caleb was born, patched now with wood where the mud had crumbled. A leaning barn, a corral, a stone-lined well, a dry stream that ran wet in the spring, and behind the house, 3 flatstones under a lone cottonwood tree, which he did not point out. He drew up in the yard and set the brake. The 2 sisters stayed on the wagon a long moment, taking in the place. Not judging it, measuring it. The way people measure a room they may have to defend. Nashota climbed down first, Dolly after her. Neither one wobbled on the drop, despite the 7 hours of hard riding, despite the shackles that had cut Dolly's ankles bloody 2 nights ago, despite the rib that was making her breath sore. They landed like women who had been landing on hard ground their entire lives, because they had. "You take the house," Caleb told them. "Both rooms. There is a bed in the front and a cot in the back. Sleep in the barn. There is a hayloft." Dry enough, Nashota's eyes moved across the yard. She was cataloging sightlines, approach angles, the gap in the ridge where a rider could come in unseen. "We will take the loft." That was the answer he had expected. He would have made the same call. Inside the house, he showed them the pantry. Salt pork, beans, a sack of cornmeal, dried apples his Aldweber's wife had brought him last Christmas out of a pity he had not asked for. He showed them the stove, the water bucket, the powder and ball for the old Colt Dragoon he kept above the door. He did not tell them where the second one was hidden. That was still his business, and he was still learning them. Dolly's breath caught worse when she bent to look at the stove. Nashota's eyes narrowed. Caleb went to the small chest at the foot of his cot in the back room and drew out a folded strip of clean cotton. "My mother," he told Nashota over his shoulder, "was a midwife. Before she married my father, she taught me how to wrap a cracked rib. I would like to wrap your sisters, if she will let me." Nashota translated, in Apache, low and quick. Dolly's eyes flicked to Caleb's face, then back to her sister. She said one word. Nah. Shota nodded. She says yes, but not because she trusts you. Because she trusts me, and I trust that your hands know the work. Fair enough. That is more than I deserve on a first day. He wrapped the ribs. Slow, careful. The youngest's skin was warm and bruised, the color of a thunderhead along the whole left side. Two of the ribs shifted under his palm in a way he did not like. He did not tell her that. He tightened the cotton in the pattern his mother had shown him when he was 10 years old and had cracked his own rib falling out of the cottonwood tree that now stood over 3 graves. He tied the knot on the side away from her heart. He stepped back. Dolly exhaled. First real breath she had taken in days. Nashota watched him the entire time. When he finished, she said quietly, "You have done this before. Twice. Once on myself. Once on a foreman who did not last the winter anyway. But the rap was not what killed him. That was pneumonia. Different beast." Her mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was closer to the memory of one. But she was not there yet. Not with him. He left them in the front room and went out to see to the horses. The sun was falling behind the west ridge, painting the red rock the color of old blood, and he stood in the corral longer than he needed to. Because the truth was, he did not know what he had done today. He had spent every dollar he had. He had sold the last pieces of his mother and his father. He had brought 2 Apache women home to a valley where the last 4 ranchers had been burned out by raiders in the past year. And he had done it because a girl of 19 had eyes that reminded him of a girl who was dead. He was a fool. He knew it, and he did not regret it, which was perhaps the definition of a fool. He looked up at the ridge and saw a hawk still turning. Same one from this morning, maybe. Maybe a different one. Hawks all look the same to a man who is trying not to think. That first night, he did not sleep in the loft. He slept in the barn on a horse blanket, with the dragoon within reach, and the barn door propped open a hand's width so he could hear. He heard the wind. He heard a coyote 3 ridges over. He heard once the soft footfall of one of the sisters walking the perimeter of the house in the dark. He did not know which one. He did not get up to check, because that would have been an insult to both of them. Have you ever slept in your own barn because you wanted the women in your house to feel safe? Have you ever known that the only thing between you and being hated was some small act of decency? Caleb had not known that. Not until that night. And once you know it, you cannot unknow it. Dawn came the color of a peach that has been sitting on the windowsill too long. Caleb was already up, already dress-based, already at the corral, throwing hay to the horses. He had not slept more than an hour. He did not feel it. Grief and worry made a strange kind of fuel. He had lived on that fuel for 5 years, and he had learned not to trust it. Nashota came out of the barn behind him, silent as a shadow crossing water. She had braided her hair overnight and pinned a small hawk feather at the base of the braid. Not a war feather, not exactly, but something. She still sleeps. She has not slept like that in 3 months, Caleb nodded. Good. Nashota watched him throw the hay a while. Then, without turning her head, she asked, "Why did you buy us?" He answered without turning either. "Because if I had walked past that block, I would have heard about what happened to you later, and then I would have had to live with that." She was quiet. "You still might have to live with things. Because of us. I know, do you?" He looked at her then. She was not challenging him. She was asking, really asking, and that was, in some ways, harder to answer than a challenge would have been, I know. My father used to say a man's honor is not measured by what he takes. It is measured by what he refuses to take. I refused something yesterday. I do not get to walk it back. She held her gaze a long moment. Then she nodded, small and slow, and she went back to the barn to sit with her sister. He worked the fence line through the middle of the morning. The east stretch had been sagging since May, and the spring rains had rotted 2 posts. He replaced them. He was hammering the second one home when a movement in the dirt caught his eye and pulled his hammer up short. Tracks. Not his. Not the sisters. He had walked this line yesterday morning, and it had been clean. He knelt, studied. A single horse, unshod, coming in from the North Wash, circling the water-same route, then 20 paces off a second set. Different horse, also unshod, also careful cattle sign, disturbed. 2 head, maybe 3, driven off toward the North Ridge. Something cold moved through his belly. He stood dusting his knees and looked up toward the ridge. Nothing moved up there but the wind, but somebody had been here in the night. Somebody who knew how to move without waking dogs. He did not have dogs, but that was not the point. The point was, they knew what they were doing. Nashota had come out of the barn again and was watching him from the yard. He waved her over. She came without hurrying. She read the tracks before he had to say a word. She crouched next to them, her fingers hovering just above the dust, the way a doctor's fingers hover over a wound before touching it. She tilted her head. She followed the line of the second set of tracks with her eyes. She stood up. 2 riders. Smescalero, you are sure, the way the hoofprint sinks on the outside edge. Their horses are bred for the eastern plains, different weight in the shoulder, and the cattle sign. Take only the young ones. They know what will fetch a price at Sonoran markets, and what will not. Mescalero raiders know that market. My people do not use it. It is a family that hates my family. Caleb absorbed this. Then he said, so of all the ranches in this valley, they came to mine. On the second night that you happened to be here, Nashota's face did not change. But her eyes went hard. They did not come for us. They came for the cattle. 2 riders would not attack the house. Yet she did not disagree. They walked back to the yard together. Kazuma's mind was running fast enough that he almost missed it, but he caught it just before he stepped inside the house. You are not surprised. I am not. Which means you knew this was a possibility. I knew that your ranch sits at the mouth of 3 trails. The one from the south, the traders come up. The one from the east, the soldiers come down. The one from the north, the Mescalero, come and go. You have been living at a crossroads and calling it a home. It is a good home, but it is also a place where things happen. My father would have said it is a place where the wind changes direction 3 times in one day, and a man who lives in such a place learns to trust his eyes more than his ears. Caleb was quiet a long time. Then he said, your father sounds like a man I would have liked. Nashota's mouth did the thing that was almost a smile again. He would have liked you if he had lived long enough to meet you. She went inside. The week that followed was the strangest week of his adult life. Not because of the sisters. They kept to themselves, mostly. Not because of the tracks. He rode the perimeter twice a day now, and the tracks did not return. It was strange, because he was not alone in his own house for the first time in 5 years. And he had not realized, until the sound of 2 other people breathing under his roof at night, how loud the silence had been, how long he had been listening to it, how much of himself he had spent standing very still, waiting for a sound that would never come. By the end of the 3rd day, Dolly could sit up without the sharp intake of breath that meant her ribs were shifting. By the end of the 4th, she had come out of the porch and taken a length of harness leather off the workbench where Caleb had left it. And by the end of the 5th day, the harness was mended. He had not asked her to do it. She had seen the work. She had done the work. That was the pattern of both sisters. See a thing, do the thing. No speeches, no credit taken. He taught them the parts of the ranch that his father had taught him. He showed them the ledger book where he kept the tallies. He showed them how to figure interest on this note he still owed at the Silver Ridge Bank. He explained the way land titles worked in this new territory, where paper from Washington City was slowly overwriting paper from Mexico City, and how a rancher who did not understand the switch could lose everything he owned to a clerk with a bad pen. Nashota listened to all of it with the focus of a woman who had already lost one country to a piece of paper and did not intend to lose another. In return, they taught him things that no book of his father's had ever contained. Dolly taught him the yarrow leaf, crushed between two stones packed into a wound to slow the bleeding until the hand of a real healer could reach it. She taught him 3 kinds of moss for 3 kinds of fever. She taught him that the cottonwood tree behind the house, the one over 3 graves, dropped a bark that could be steeped for pain when a man had nothing stronger. He had lived under that tree for 5 years and had never known. Nashota taught him to read a canyon, not with his eyes, with his ears. Which side of the wash the wind was climbing, where the birds went silent. What time of the afternoon the shadow filled the bottom and turned it into a place where a rifle could be waiting. She walked him up the North Ridge one Sunday and pointed out 7 places within sight of his own porch where a man could lie for a whole day and never be seen. 7. Caleb had counted 3, and he had thought himself careful. Because we live in this country, we learn to see it. Because you were born in this country, you have learned not to see it. It is not your fault, it is only your teaching. Now you have new teaching. He nodded. He did not argue, because she was right. Have you ever spent your whole life inside a room and only realized one afternoon in your 30s that half the walls were painted with pictures you had trained yourself not to look at? That was Caleb Hayes in the 2nd week of that summer. Learning to see a country he had thought he already knew. The soldiers came on a Thursday, 6 of them coming up the South Trail in the middle of the afternoon, riding in a loose column that a lazy man would have called sloppy and a careful man would have called deliberate. Caleb was in the corral when he heard the first hoofbeat. He climbed the fence rail and shaded his eyes with his hand. 6 bluecoats, wide brim hats, carbines slung, and at the head of the column, a man on a big bay gelding whose posture in the saddle was so straight it was almost an insult to the horse. Dragoons' 1st Regiment, out of the territorial post. He knew the insignia. Every rancher in the territory knew the insignia. He climbed down from the fence, wiped his palms on his pants, and walked out to meet them in the yard. Nashota was already at the edge of the barn door, in the shadow. He caught the outline of her without turning his head. She was not carrying a weapon that he could see, which meant she was carrying a weapon that he could not. The lead rider dismounted with a precision that turned the act into a small speech. Boots to earth, reins over the wrist, hat off held against the chest. Introduction, unhurried, Ezra Blackwood, Lieutenant. 1st Dragoons. He offered no hand. Caleb offered none in return. Mr. Hayes, there has been talk in Silver Ridge. I am here to see if the talk is true. What talk? That you purchased 2 Apache women at auction last Tuesday. That you have not sold them. That you have not sent them to the mission. That you have, instead, brought them to this ranch and given them the run of the place. Caleb's face did not move. You have your talk right. The lieutenant's eyes were the color of ice that has been sitting under a north window for a long time. Blue turned pale. Blue turned tired. Blue turned into something that was not really a color anymore, just a way of not looking away. That was a mistake, Mr. Hayes, was it? The lieutenant tilted his head, fractionally, a tell so small it was almost private. Apache prisoners are wards of the territory, sir, not private property, regardless of what the auctioneer wrote down. You are, at best, holding federal detainees on a civilian property without authorization. At worst, you are harboring hostiles. Neither of those is what I am doing. Then tell me what you are doing. Caleb thought about the answer for a full breath before he gave it. Because the answer mattered. Not for the lieutenant. For himself, I am running a ranch. I have hired hands. Nothing in the territorial statute says what the color or origin of a man's hired hand must be. If there is such a statute, produce it. I will read it. Until then, I will continue to run my ranch with the hands I have chosen. The lieutenant's ice-blue eyes did not change, but something behind them did. Some kind of temperature dropped. Hired hands. Yes, you will produce the contract of hire then, I will. And by the time you come back to ask for it, it will be waiting. Something almost like respect flickered across the lieutenant's face and was gone. That was when Nashota stepped out of the shadow of the barn. She did not walk fast. She did not walk slow. She walked the way a mountain lion walks across a meadow at dusk. And the 6 dragoons behind Lieutenant Blackwood shifted in their saddles all at once. Not because she had reached for anything. Because she was almost 7 feet tall, and she was Apache, and she was not afraid of them. And that combination, in the year 1850, in New Mexico territory, was the kind of thing that made trained soldiers reach for their carbine straps without knowing they had done it. Blackwood raised one hand. The carbines eased. He looked at Nashota. Nashota looked at him, and in the long half-second before either of them spoke, Caleb saw something pass across the lieutenant's face that he had not expected to see. Grief old buried, poorly buried. The kind of grief that a man carries around inside a locked box that he keeps kicking by accident. You know, Blackwood said to Nashota. His voice was different now, quieter. What I lost. Nashota did not answer. Blackwood turned to Caleb, my wife. Margaret, killed by Apache raiders 3 years ago in the Chiricahua foothills. She was riding out to meet me at the end of a patrol. She had a yellow shawl on. I remember the yellow. When we found her, she was gone in a way that no man should have to describe. The lieutenant's voice did not rise. It did not shake. It did not do any of the things that a voice is supposed to do when a man is not talking about a dead wife in front of strangers. It simply reported. Like a man reading out an inventory. So you will understand, Mr. Hayes, when I tell you that I am not comfortable with this arrangement, not for reasons of politics, not for reasons of law, but because every night I hear my wife's voice on the wind, and every morning I ride out to look for the men who did it, and I am not finished looking. Caleb held his gaze. He did not look away. He did not offer sympathy, because sympathy would have been an insult, and he understood that. He said only, I am sorry for your loss. The lieutenant's mouth did the smallest possible thing, not a smile, not even close. Sorry does not return the dead. No, it does not. Blackwood pat his hat back on his head. He mounted at his bay gelding. He looked down at Caleb from that height for a full beat. I will return in a week's time, for that contract of hire, and I will be looking at other things also. Do not disappoint me, Mr. Hayes. He turned the gelding. He rode out. The 6 dragoons followed him in the same loose column. Their dust hung in the yard long after the sound of their hooves had faded past the south ridge. Caleb stood in the yard. Nashota stood beside him. Neither one of them said anything for a long time. Finally, Nashota said, He believes what he told you. I know he does. That does not mean it is true. Caleb looked at her. Not all Apache live in the same place or fight the same wars. My people were not in the Chiricahua foothills 3 years ago. My people were in the Dragoon Mountains, fighting a different enemy on a different mountain. The men who killed his wife are not my people. But he will not care about that. Because grief does not care about maps, Caleb nodded, slowly. That is a true thing. She looked at him. You believe me, I do. Why? Because I have been where he is standing, and when I was standing there, I wanted every Mexican in the territory to burn. Every last one. I would have set the fire myself, and it took me 2 years to understand that the men who killed my family were 4 men, not a nation, not a people, 4 men, whose names I still do not know, but 4 men, and nobody else is responsible for what they did, and nobody else deserves what I wanted to give them. Nashota was quiet a long time. Then she said, You are not the man I thought you were, Caleb Hayes, and you are not the woman the auction paper said you were. The days that followed changed the shape of the ranch without changing the shape of the ranch. That was the strange thing about it. To a man riding by on the ridge, Hayes Ranch looked the same as it had for 5 years. Same house, same barn, same corral, same lone man walking the perimeter at dawn. But if that rider had stopped and stayed a while, he would have seen the difference. He would have seen that the man walking the perimeter was no longer walking alone. He would have seen a tall woman on the ridge with a bow across her back, watching the trails from an angle no rancher would have thought to watch them from. He would have seen a younger woman on the porch, coaxing a cracked bridle back to life with an awl and a strip of leather. He would have seen the well drawn twice as often as it used to be, and a second cook fire and a whole pattern of life laid down over the old pattern like a second coat of paint. The old coat was not gone. It was still under there, but the color of the ranch, when you stood at the edge of the yard at dusk, was different now. Caleb rode into Silver Ridge in the middle of the 3rd week for coffee and salt and a new file for the corral gate. He did not take the wagon. He did not want to draw eyes. He tied his gelding at the rail outside Peterson's General and went inside with his hat in his hand and his money in his pocket, and he was out again in under 10 minutes, and he thought that was going to be the end of it. Except that on his way back to the gelding, the door of the saloon across the street opened, and out came Boone, and behind him 3 other men in shirts and canvas pants. Boone's memory, as Caleb had feared, was long, haze. Caleb did not stop walking. "Sir!" Boone crossed the street with his 3 friends behind him. "Word around town is you have got yourself a matched pair at that ranch of yours." Working the place reached the gelding. He put the coffee and the salt into the saddlebag. He looped the file over the horn. He did not turn. Word around town is nobody's business but the town's, except the town is asking. The town wants to know, are they hired? Or are they something else? Caleb tightened the strap on the saddlebag, because his hands needed to do something that was not the thing they wanted to do. "I am running a ranch. Same as I have always run a ranch, with Apache, with hired hands. Hired, yes. You pay them, I pay them. In what? In the same coin you would pay any hand. And I do not owe you the ledger." Boone laughed. It was not a laugh with any pleasure in it. It was the sound a rattlesnake would make if a rattlesnake could laugh. "You think you are better than us, Hayes? No, I think I am tired." He turned around then, because he had to, because a man can mount on horse with his back to 4 men in a street, and when he turned, the first fist was already coming. He got his forearm up in time to catch it on the bone. It hurt. He swung back with his free hand and caught Boone across the jaw and heard something crack that was not his own knuckles, which was a small mercy. Then the other 3 were on him. They were not trying to kill him. He understood that in the middle of the second breath. If they had wanted to kill him, they would have used the pistols on their belts. What they wanted was to teach him. What they wanted was a lesson written in bruises that his ranch hands could read when he got home. He kept his feet for as long as he could, which was longer than they expected, because a man who has worked cattle alone for 5 years is not a soft man, but 4 is 4. He went down against the side of the water trough, and the boots came in against his ribs and against the meat of his thigh, and he curled around his own belly and waited for it to be over. He kept his face against the ground, because the face was the message they wanted to send, and he was going to deny them that message if he could. They stopped when someone in Peterson's window shouted for the sheriff. Boone spat on the dust beside Caleb's ear. "Next time, we'd take one of them home with us and see if you cry." Then the boots went away. Caleb lay in the dust for a full minute. He counted breaths. He checked his teeth with his tongue. All there. He checked his ribs with his hand. Sores, not broken. He got up. He mounted the gelding on the second try. He rode out of Silver Ridge at a walk, because at a walk it did not hurt as much, and because at a walk nobody could tell from a distance that he had just been beaten in the street. The 15 miles home took him 3 hours. By the time he came down into the valley, the sun was against the far ridge and painting his shadow long on the ground. He rode into the yard and got down and unsaddled the gelding and put the file on the workbench in the barn and did all of it without saying a word. Nashota was standing in the door of the house. She did not ask. He did not tell. He walked past her and went to the pump and worked the handle and put his face into the cold water and held it there until his lungs made him come up. When he did, she was standing beside the pump with a clean cotton cloth in her hand. He sat on the porch step. She dabbed at the split above his eyebrow that he had not known was there. She turned his chin with 2 fingers and looked at the bruise coming up along his jaw. She lifted his shirt with the tip of 1 finger and looked at the boot mark blooming purple across his lower ribs. She did all of it in a silence that felt heavier than any words she could have chosen. Then she said, "How many?" "4, you know their names. 1 of them. The other 3 are new to me." Nashota folded the cotton cloth. "You did not fight to win. I fought to leave. There is a difference. I know the difference." Dolly had come out onto the porch behind them. She was carrying a cup of the willow bark tea her sister had shown him how to make. She put it into his hand without looking at his face. She looked instead at his hands, and she saw the knuckles, and her eyes went dark. She said only, "You struck one of them, the one who spoke first." "I think I broke his jaw." Dolly's mouth moved. "Not as close, good." The next morning he was up before dawn as always, moving slower than usual, and he was in the barn checking on the mare when the sound came down from the north ridge. Hoofbeats, not 4, not 6, more, coming fast. He was out of the barn with the dragoon in his hand before he had finished thinking about it. Nashota was already in the yard, her Chiricahua bow strung, an arrow between her ears, and though not yet nocked. Dolly was on the roof of the house. He did not know how she had gotten up there so fast with her ribs still healing. He did not have time to wonder. The riders came over the ridge in a line. 3 of them, then 4, then a 5th, all Apache, all moving with the loose economy of men who had been in the saddle since childhood. Caleb raised the dragoon. Nashota raised her hand. "Wait," he waited. The lead rider crested the last swell and came down toward the yard, and Nashota's hand dropped to her side, and something in her whole body changed, the way a river changes when the ice finally moves. "Kaya." She said the name so quiet Caleb almost missed it. He did not know the word, but he knew the tone. He had heard it once before, 5 years ago, from his own mouth. On the day the marshal had ridden into the ashes of Hayes Ranch to tell him he was not the only survivor after all, because a neighbor had found his sister's horse alive 3 days later, and though the sister herself was gone, the horse was not. He had said that name then, Sarah. In that same tone, the tone for a person you had thought was dead, the lead rider came into the yard and swung down from a paint horse that had been ridden hard for 2 days. He was young, maybe Dolly's age, maybe a year older. Puckered a scar on his cheek that ran from the corner of his mouth to the hinge of his jaw, the kind of scar that a boy earns young and keeps forever. He looked at Nashota. He looked at Dolly on the roof, and then he looked at Caleb, and his hand went to the knife at his hip, out of pure habit, or he stopped himself and put both hands out to the side. "Cousin," he said it in English, because he had already read the room and understood the room contained a white man who was armed and calm and standing in front of his own house. So he chose the language that would keep everybody breathing. "Kaya," Nashota again. This time as a greeting. They spoke then in Apache. Fast, Nashota's voice climbing and falling in a way Caleb had not heard from her in 3 weeks of English. Dolly came down off the roof by way of the barn ladder and joined them in the yard, and for a full minute the 3 cousins stood in a knot that was too tight for any outsider to enter. Caleb lowered the dragoon. He walked back to the porch step and sat down on it, because he understood in that moment that the world he had been building with these 2 women was about to shift under his feet, and there was nothing he could do to slow it down. So he sat. And he watched. When Nashota finally turned to him, her face was different, not softer. He did not think Nashota's face was capable of softer, but looser, as if a wire that had been pulled taut inside her for 3 months had for one moment gone slack. "My cousin brings news." Caleb waited. "Some of our people are alive," he nodded. Slowly. "How many?" 23. "From 4 bands. They have gathered in a canyon east of the Peloncillos. They have been looking for us since the winter." "That is good news. That is the best news you could bring." Nashota's eyes did not leave his. "It is news. Whether it is good, we will see." Kaya walked forward then. He stopped a respectful distance from the porch. He addressed Caleb directly, in a slow, careful English that had clearly been learnt from a Sonoran priest a long time ago. "You are the man who took the shackles. I am. You have kept my cousins whole. I have kept them fed. They have kept themselves whole. I only got out of the way." Kaya considered that. He glanced sideways at Nashota. Something in his eyes when he looked at her was the look a brother gives his sister when he is trying to figure out what has been done to her and by whom. Nashota gave him a look back that said, without any words at all, "You will not ask me that question in front of him." Kaya nodded once and did not ask. He turned back to Caleb. "The canyon is a hard place. Little game, no cattle, winter is coming. We can offer my cousins shelter with our people, but it is only shelter."
"Not safety?"
Ab thought about the word choices. "You are being honest. I am being honest. Why? Because you have been honest with them. That is a debt in my people. I will not begin a new relation with a lie." Caleb looked at Nashota. Nashota looked back, and he understood that this was the moment he had been dreading in the back of his mind since the day he tore up the paper of sale in his own hearth and burned it. The moment when the two women who had become the shape of his days would have somewhere else to go. He drew a slow breath. It hurt. His ribs still remembered the boots. "You should go. To your cousins." Nashota did not answer right away. Dolly spoke first. She had not spoken since the riders came over the ridge. Her voice was quiet. But her voice, when she used it, always went a long way. "If we go, you will not be safer. You will be less safe. The lieutenant will come back looking for us. When he finds we are gone, he will decide you helped us escape. He will burn what he cannot prove. I have been burned before. That is not an answer. That is a memory." He had no reply to that, because it was true, and because it had been a long time since anyone had caught him hiding behind his own grief and named it out loud. Nashota looked past him then, at the porch behind him, at the door of the house his father had built, at the smoke rising thin from the stovepipe, at the corral, at the well, at the low wall of red rock where the cottonwood stood. There is a third path. Kaya's head tilted. Nashota did not turn to look at her cousin. She kept her eyes on the ranch, on the shape of it, as if she were measuring it for something. The canyon cannot feed 23, not through the winter. It can hide them, but it cannot feed them, and a place that cannot feed you is not a safe place. It is only a slow one. Kaya did not disagree. She turned then to Caleb. Only to Caleb. "There is water here. There is grass. There is a valley with 3 walls of stone and only one open mouth. There is a man who has already put his name on a paper of sale to save 2 lives, which means he has already crossed the line that most white men will not cross even once. And there is a house." Caleb did not answer, because he already knew what she was going to say. And she was going to say it whether he answered or not. This was where he made his choice. He understood that, because Nashota was not proposing it. She was laying it in his lap and stepping back and waiting to see if he would pick it up. If he did not pick it up, they would ride to the canyon and be gone from his life by the end of the week. If he did, everything he had would be at risk. His land, his name, his neck. For the first time in 5 years, Caleb Hayes was not choosing between shades of grief. He was choosing between grief and something else. "Bring them here." Kaya's eyes went wide, Dolly's went shining. Nashota's did not change, because she had known. Caleb stood up from the porch steps, slow because of the ribs, but steady. "How long? To bring them? 3 days. If we ride tonight, then ride tonight. Bring them by the North Wash. Come in after dark. I will have the barn cleared and the well drawn. There is food enough in the pantry to stretch for 4 days. After that, we will have to figure it out. But 4 days I can promise." Kaya looked at him a long moment. Then he did something Caleb had not seen a man do since his father died. He put his right hand flat against his own chest, over his heart, and he inclined his head. Not a bow, not a nod, something between the two, an old gesture. A serious one. "I will bring them." He mounted the paint horse. He and his 4 riders turned north and were gone over the ridge inside of a minute. and the yard was quiet again, and the sun was up, and Caleb Hayes was still standing on his porch. But he was not the man he had been standing on it an hour before. For the first time in 5 years, Caleb Hayes was building something instead of mourning something. The 3 days that followed were the fullest days of his life since childhood. He cleared the barn. He dragged the old tools out and stacked them under the lean-to. He rigged canvas partitions from the salt-white sailcloth his father had brought back from Galveston a lifetime ago. He hauled water. He hauled more water. He killed a calf. He salted the meat. He rode the perimeter 3 times a day. He ate standing up. He slept 2 hours a night. And on the 3rd night, at moonrise, the North Wash produced a sound that had not been heard on his land in 50 years. The soft, patient hoofbeats of 23 horses moving in single file. They came in the way Kaya had promised, in the dark, without a torch between them. Warriors first, then women with children on their laps, then old ones held upright by younger arms. 23 souls, 4 bands, a history of fires behind every one of them. Caleb stood in the yard with a lantern turned low and let them pass. He did not speak. He did not offer a hand. He only nodded to each one as they came, and each one nodded back, and the yard, which had been a lonely square of dirt for 5 years, filled slowly with the breath of a people. The last rider to come down was an old man. He rode a paint mare that could not have been less than 20 years old. His hair was a full white. His face had the fine, deep lines of a man who has spent 7 decades looking into the sun and refusing to look away. He carried no weapon that Caleb could see. He wore a single feather at the base of his braid, and when he dismounted in front of the porch step, he did it slowly, the way an old man dismounts, when he knows he still has business to do and does not intend to waste his last fuse. Nashota stepped forward. She spoke to him in Apache, reverently, heads slightly bowed. The old man listened, then he turned and looked at Caleb. He walked to Caleb. He stopped an arm's length away. He looked up into Caleb's face, because Caleb was tall for a white man, but the old man was shorter than most, and there was a long moment of the two of them measuring each other in that lantern light. Then the old man spoke, in English soft as a moth's wing. "You are the man who sees." Caleb did not know what to say to that. The old man smiled. Not much of a smile. The smile of a man who has been smicing for 70 years and has learned to do it with only the corners of his mouth. "My name is Rising Eagle. In my youth, I fought south of here, in the country that is now yours, though it was ours once and belonged to another before that. I have seen many things. I have seen most of them twice. I did not think I would see a white man open his door in the night for the children of the people he was raised to fear. So tonight I see one more new thing before I die, which is a gift. I have not done anything yet. You have done the first thing, which is the hard one." He reached out. He put one dry palm against the side of Caleb's face for the space of a breath. He said something in Apache that Caleb did not understand. Then he let his hand fall. He turned. He walked to the barn with the slow, steady grace of a man who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Nashota went with him. Dolly went with her. Caleb stood alone in the yard with the lantern in his hand for a long time. He did not know it then, but that hand against his cheek was the closest thing to a father's blessing he had felt since the morning 5 years earlier when he had rolled his own father into a shallow grave and covered him with red dirt. The next morning brought a problem he had not solved in the 3 days of preparation. What to do with 23 people in daylight? He had cleared the barn. He had thought that would be enough. It was not enough. The barn was big for a rancher's barn. It was small for a household. 23 bodies could sleep in it. 23 bodies could not live in it. Not for the winter that was coming. And the winter was coming. He could smell it on the wind that came down from the north ridge in the 2nd hour after dawn. 2 weeks off, maybe 3, so they built. The warriors took the axes. Kaya and 2 others rode up into the pinon flat above the North Wash and came back with the first load of poles before noon. Rising Eagle marked the ground behind the barn with a stick. He drew 4 rectangles. He did not explain. He did not need to. The Apache who watched him understood the shapes the way a man understands his own handwriting. They raised the first structure in a day and a half. Low, long. A framework of pine poles lashed with rawhide, roofed with brush and packed earth. The kind of shelter that would not stand up to a hurricane and would not need to, because there were no hurricanes here, only weather. And weather was a thing you could plan for. By the end of the first week, there were 4 such shelters at the back of the ranch, and the barn had gone back to being a barn. The children slept in the house. That was Caleb's rule. He did not phrase it as a rule. He phrased it as an invitation. But he made it clear enough that Nashota understood him. The house was Worm's. The children's were still healing. The children slept in the house. The women who nursed them slept in the house. The rest could take the shelters. Rising Eagle slept in the house, too. Nobody argued about that. When you are 70-something years old and you have carried people across 2 winters of running, you sleep in the house. Caleb himself moved back into the barn, which had become, in the space of a fortnight, a smaller and less lonely place than it had been. Have you ever counted the sounds of a home before? The scrape of a wooden spoon against a clay bowl, the soft laughter of 2 women who share a joke you will never understand. The murmur of an old man telling a story to a child who has not yet decided whether to believe him. Caleb counted them now, every night. He lay in the barn on his blanket, and he listened, and he counted, and the number was always larger than it had been the night before, and each new sound was, in its small way, a repair. There were 4 children. 2 were toddlers, twin girls, and their mother wore them tied against her chest day and night, and had taught them, over 3 months of running, to sleep through anything. They almost never made a sound in daylight. Caleb had heard them cry only twice in the first 10 days, both times at night, both times briefly, both times comforted before he could rise from the barn to see if he was needed. The third was a girl of about 6. She followed Dolly everywhere. She said almost nothing. But she smiled when Dolly smiled, which meant she smiled more each day, because Dolly was smiling more each day, which was a thing Caleb had not expected to notice, and had begun to notice anyway. The 4th was a boy of 8. His name was Little Bear. He was small for his age, sharp-eyed, quiet in a way that was not natural in a child, and could only have come from surviving something. His parents had been killed in the same raid that had scattered Nashota's band. He was raised now by an aunt, but the aunt had 4 other charges and only 2 arms, so Little Bear had taken in the 2nd week to following Caleb around the ranch. Not close, not underfoot, just close enough to watch. When Caleb split wood, Little Bear watched from 10 paces off. When Caleb rode out to check the fence, Little Bear was somehow at the corral gate when he came back. When Caleb sat down on the porch step in the evening to nurse his cold coffee, Little Bear appeared at the corner of the house with a stick in his hand, whittling something, not looking up. On the 9th day, Caleb held out his hand. "Come here." Little Bear came. He stood at the porch step. He held out the thing he had been whittling. It was a small horse, head down, grazing, 4 legs. The proportions were wrong, and an 8-year-old's proportions are always wrong. It was the best gift Caleb had received in 5 years. "Thank you." Little Bear did not speak English, but he understood the tone. He nodded once, formal as a small chief, and then he ran back around the corner of the house. Caleb sat on the step and turned the little horse in his fingers. He put the wooden horse on the mantel above the stove. It stayed there. The next morning, Little Bear was in a corral before Caleb was, sitting on the top rail, watching the mare. When Caleb walked up, the boy jumped down without a word and took the bridle out of Caleb's hand and walked it over to the mare and stood on his tiptoes and slipped it over her nose the way he had watched Caleb do it the day before. He did not do it perfectly. He fumbled the throat latch, but he did it. And when he stepped back, he looked up at Caleb with a face that was trying very hard to be nothing at all. Caleb crouched down, so they were at the same height. He fixed the throat latch. He did it slow enough that the boy could watch. Then he lifted the boy up onto the mare's back, bareback, sat him there, held the mare's halter and led her 3 slow circles around the corral. Little Bear did not make a sound the whole time, but when Caleb lifted him down, his face had changed. Something in it that had been closed for a long time had opened by the width of a knife edge. That night at supper, Little Bear sat next to Caleb. Nobody had told him to. Nobody had discussed it. The boy simply took the seat beside Caleb, the way Boy takes the seat beside his father, and Rising Eagle, from the other end of the table, saw it, and Rising Eagle's mouth did the corner smile again. And he looked at Nashota across the pine boards, and Nashota looked back at him. And a small thing passed between the two of them that Caleb caught only the edge of. Later, when the food was cleared and the children were bedded, Nashota came out to the barn. She stood in the doorway. She did not come in. He has chosen you. Caleb was rubbing down the mare. He did not stop. He is 8 years old. He has not chosen. He has attached. There is a difference. There is not. Not with our children. Not after what they have lost. When a child of ours attaches, it is a choice. He has chosen. Caleb stopped rubbing the mare, Nashota. I lost a sister 5 years ago. I have not been able to look at a child that age for 5 years without seeing her face. That is not a foundation for a boy to build on. He is not asking for a foundation. He is asking for a hand to hold on to while he rebuilds his own. That is a different thing. Caleb was quiet. She said from the doorway, "You do not lose family. You just make room for new ones." She turned. She was gone. Caleb stood in the barn with the currycomb in his hand for a long time after that. You do not lose family. You just make room for new ones. He had spent 5 years believing the first part. He had not, until that moment, believed the second. He went to the mantle that night. He picked up the small horse. He turned it in the lamplight. He put it back. The next morning, he taught Little Bear how to check a horse's teeth. The morning after that, how to read a hoof for a stone. The morning after that, how to throw a rope, which the boy could not do, which the boy tried for 3 hours anyway, which the boy came back to the following morning without being asked. Nashota was right. He had known she was right. He had just needed to hear her say it. Blackwood came twice in those weeks. The first time was on a Tuesday afternoon in the 5th week. He rode in with his 6 dragoons in the same loose column as before. By the time his bay gelding cleared the last rise, every Apache on the ranch had melted into the rocks. The cook fires were cold. The barn was empty except for hay. The washing was on the line. The shelters behind the barn had canvas thrown over their frames and a scaster of broken tools laid over the canvas, so that from any angle a rider would take them for old lean-tos in mid-collapse. Blackwood dismounted. He looked at the wash on the line. He looked at the barn. He walked into the barn without permission. He walked out again. He looked at Caleb. Where is the contract of hire? Caleb produced a paper from inside his coat. He had, in fact, written one that morning. Nashota's name, Doley, wages, signed and dated. Blackwood read it. He handed it back. That is only 2. I only hired 2. Blackwood looked around the yard. He looked at Caleb a long moment. He did not say what he was thinking. He mounted his gelding. I will be back. He came back on the following Tuesday. Same routine. Same result. Silence. Same look. At the end of it, as if he was slowly assembling a picture out of pieces that did not quite fit together and were beginning, finally, to suggest their subject. The 3rd Tuesday he did not come, which was worse, because Caleb understood, without having to be told, that a man like Blackwood did not skip a Tuesday because he had forgotten. He skipped a Tuesday because he was doing something else that Tuesday. Something he did not want Caleb to see the shape of. Caleb doubled the watch. He put Nashota on the north point at night and Kaya on the south. He slept in the barn with the dragoon on his chest, and on the Thursday afternoon of that same week, the thing they had all been waiting for finally happened. A rider came in from the north point at a hard gallop. It was one of Kaya's men, a young warrior named 2 Horses. He came into the yard with his horse foaming and his face grey. Caleb was at the corral. 2 horses did not dismount. 50, coming from the east road. 2 hours, 50 what? 50 dragoons? Caleb felt the cold come again. Not in his belly this time, lower. In the place a man feels a thing he has been waiting for and hoping would not come. You are sure of the count. I counted twice. It is 50, and they are not riding in a patrol column. They are riding in a search column. They have pack mules with them. They will be here for 2 days, maybe 3. They mean to turn over every rock. Caleb closed his eyes for the space of 1 breath. He opened them. Get Nashota. Get Rising Eagle. Get Kaya. Now 2 horses wheeled his horse and was gone. The 4 of them met in the barn inside of 10 minutes. Rising Eagle sat on an overturned bucket because his knees were old. Nashota stood by the door. Kaya paced. Caleb stood in the middle, his mind running at 4 times the speed he was comfortable with. We cannot hide 23. Not from 50 men with 2 days. The caves in the North Canyon, they will search the caves. That is the first place they will look. Every rancher in this territory knows about those caves. Blackwood will too. Then we ride out now, tonight. We go to the canyon in the east. They will track us. 50 men with pack mules will not be outrun by 23, 4 of whom are children and 1 of whom is Rising Eagle. Forgive me, Uncle. Rising Eagle waved a hand. Truth is not an insult. Caleb had not spoken. He was thinking, fast, and also slow, because a thing was moving in the back of his head, and he was afraid that if he grabbed at it too quick, it would slip. So he let it come. Blackwood cannot arrest what he does not see. Nashota looked at him. He cannot arrest an Apache he does not know. Is Apache, I saw, stopped pacing. Explain. Captain to Rising Eagle, you told me you fought in the South. In your youth. Yes, long ago. You speak Spanish. Rising Eagle's corner smile came back. Better than English? How many of our people here speak Spanish well enough to pass? Nashota answered without hesitating. 8, maybe 10. Caleb nodded slowly. And how many of the men can wear a wide-brimmed hat and canvas pants and not look wrong? Kaya's eyes went wide as he saw it. You mean to hide them in plain sight. I mean to change what he is looking at. He is looking for a hidden band of Apache refugees. He will not find one, because he will find instead a legal ranch. Employing legal vaqueros from south of the border, in a territory that was Mexican until 2 years ago, where half the ranches from here to Tucson employ such hands, and nobody, not even a dragoon lieutenant with a grudge, has yet figured out how to arrest a man for hiring the people who used to live on the land he now owns. Rising Eagle laughed. It was a small, dry laugh, like a leaf turning over in wind. You want us to be from Sonora for 2 days. The old man looked at Nashota. Nashota looked at Caleb. We will need clothing. I have enough sombreros for 6. My father collected them. There is a chest in the loft. I have canvas enough to make more. There are rebozos we can weave out of the blankets under the beds. It will not be perfect, but at 20 paces, in a yard full of dust, it will be enough. The children. Little Bear speaks some Spanish. Rising Eagle nodded. He was taught by a trader who wintered with our band 2 years ago. He can teach the others 3 phrases in an afternoon. Children do this well, the old ones who cannot pass, not many, 2 myself, and the woman with the twins. You will pass. I have already heard your Spanish. It is better than mine, I know. The woman with the twins will stay in the pantry with the door closed. Twins asleep on either side of her. She has nursed them silent for 3 months. She can do it another 2 days. Nashota was looking at him. You have been thinking about this. I have been thinking about a lot of things since Blackwood first came. This is one of them. Her corner smile flickered. She did not let it settle. Then we begin. They began. But before the sun set that Thursday, the last piece of the trouble found them. Kaya came into the barn where Caleb was pulling the sombreros out of his father's cedar chest. He came in fast. His face was set. We have a problem. Caleb looked up. Fox is gone is Fox. The warrior with the notched ear. He came in the second night. He has been quiet. He has been useful. But he is gone. His horse is gone. His bedroll is gone. He rode out an hour ago through the South Wash. 2 horses saw him going and thought he was on a scout run. 2 horses is asking now. The cold came back. Sharper this time. Where does the South Wash lead? Though he already knew. The East Road. Toward the dragoon column, Caleb set the sombreros down. His mother would have said, "Trouble is a thing that never comes alone. It brings all its brothers." Caleb had heard her say it a dozen times. He had thought it was a joke. Ride him down. Bring him back. Alive, if you can. Alive. Kaya's hand was on his knife. Alive. We do not know why he ran yet, and I would rather know than not. Kaya looked at him. Kaya looked at the knife on his own hip. Kaya looked back at Caleb, and Kaya slowly took his hand off the knife. He nodded. Once, not in agreement, in discipline he rode. He came back at moonrise, with Fox roped across the saddle of his own horse. Fox was alive. He was bruised. He was not going to be riding for 2 days, but he was alive. Cass set him down in the dust of the barn like a sack of meal. Not gently, not violently, practically. Speak. Fox looked at Caleb. He looked at Nashota. He looked at Rising Eagle. He did not look at Kaya because he was afraid of Kaya, and because looking at Kaya would have made it worse. He spoke in a broken English that he had clearly been saving for a moment he had not wanted to come. They have my wife and my son. In Sestoktat, the territorial post, the barn went very quiet. The dragoons took them in a raid on our village 6 months ago. I have been looking. I have been looking every day. Last week a trader came through the canyon. He said the lieutenant, Blackwood, is holding 2 women and a child in that stockade, waiting to trade them. The trader said if I could bring news of a hidden band of Apache, the lieutenant would trade my wife and my son back to me. Alive, he looked at Caleb. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had already lost everything twice and was watching himself lose it a 3rd time. I am sorry. I did not know you. I only knew my wife's face. I only knew my son. I am sorry. Kaya's hand was back on his knife. Nashota's face was unreadable. Rising Eagle was watching Caleb. Caleb Hayes stood in the middle of his own barn, looking down at a man who had just tried to sell his life and the lives of 22 other people, and he understood that the next words out of his mouth were going to define who he was for the rest of whatever life he had left. He crouched down, not close, but close enough. Fox, Fox, Fox looked up. Do you have a saddle? Fox nodded slowly. Then you have until first light. Take your horse, take your saddle, ride. Not to the territorial post, to your wife's people in the south, if any of them are still living, or across the border, if none of them are. But do not ride to Blackwood, because if you ride to Blackwood, you will condemn 23 people to death, and none of that will bring your wife back. Blackwood will take his intelligence, and he will keep your family. That is who he is. You know that. You have always known that. Fox was crying now, silently, his shoulders shaking. You are letting me go. I am giving you a choice. It is not the same thing. The choice is, do the right thing with what is left of your life, or do the wrong thing and lose the last piece of yourself. I cannot make that choice for you. Nobody can. But I will not kill a man for loving his wife, and I will not kill a man for being afraid. Because I have been both. Kaya made a sound in his throat. Nashota put one hand on Kaya's arm. Kaya did not move away from her hand, but he did not look at Caleb either. Caleb stood up. He walked to the door of the barn. He looked out at the sky where the moon was up over the east ridge. Somebody get him a horse. 2 horses did. Caleb heard the shuffle. He did not watch. Fox rode out of the yard 40 minutes later. Nobody spoke as he went. When the sound of his hooves had faded past the South Wash, Caleb turned back to the barn, to the warriors, to Nashota, to Rising Eagle, to Kaya, who was still not looking at him. We will not hide. Nashota's head came up. We will not run. We will not vanish into the rocks and pray.
That is the strategy of a man
Who thinks he is going to lose. We are not going to lose. We are going to make them look right at us. And we are going to make them see what we tell them to see, because that is the only thing they cannot arrest. What they cannot see, Rising Eagle was smiling. Small, dry, approving. Get the sombreros out. Get the rebozos ready. Teach the children their 3 phrases. Kaya, you and I will draft the ledger book tonight. Backdated 4 months. Every one of them is going to have a name on that page by dawn. Nashota watched him. Her eyes were bright. You have grown taller, Caleb Hayes. In one afternoon, he shook his head. I have only stopped stooping. They worked through the night. The barn became a workshop. 2 of the older women set up at the long trestle table with needle and thread and every scrap of canvas Caleb owned. They cut collars. They hemmed sleeves. They stitched shirts that a man who had never seen a vaquero would still recognize as a vaquero's shirt, because they had spent their girlhoods watching such shirts move across the country south of here. And they remembered the pattern. Kaya worked at the ledger book with Caleb, the 2 of them at the kitchen table, a whale oil lamp between them, a pot of coffee that neither of them drank going cold at Caleb's elbow. Caleb wrote the names. Kaya provided them. Not the true names, the names each Apache had chosen for themselves for the 2 days that were coming. A man who would be Miguel, a woman who would be Anna, a boy who would be Tomas. Each name written in a hand that was Caleb's honest hand, dated 4 months back with a wage of $8 a month written next to it. $8 was a fair wage for a vaquero in New Mexico Territory in 1850. Caleb had checked twice. Nothing invited a lawman's suspicion like a wage that were too low or too high. By dawn, the ledger had 41 entries, 23 fresh ones, 18 older ones, invented, for hands who come and gone in the 4 months before, so that the pattern of hiring would look natural on the page. Spilled a drop of coffee on the 3rd page, and did not wipe it off. Ledgers with coffee stains looked used. Used ledgers looked honest. Rising Eagle sat on the porch through most of the night with a piece of leather in his lap. He was stitching a strap for a bridle he did not own. It looked, if you glanced at him, like the ordinary work of an ordinary grandfather. It looked, if you glanced at him twice, like exactly the ordinary work of an ordinary grandfather. That was the point. Little Bear sat with the other children in the loft above the kitchen, and Rising Eagle came upstairs twice through the night to drill them on their 3 phrases. Buenos dias, si, señor, no hablo mucho. Good day, sir. Yes, sir. I do not speak much. The last was thee. Because a child who spoke Spanish poorly could be a child from anywhere. A child who spoke Spanish well could be a child that a dragoon captain might want to talk to. Little Bear repeated the 3 phrases with the seriousness of a small general. He made the other children repeat them. He told them, in Apache, that if any of them spoke Apache tomorrow, he would make them clean the corral with their bare hands. The other children believed him. Because Little Bear did not joke, Nashota came to Caleb in the middle of the night, when the ledger was almost done and Kaya had gone to check on the perimeter. She stood in the kitchen doorway. Dolly will not go to the caves. Caleb looked up. She should. She is 19. She is still healing. She should be in the caves with the children. She will not go. Why? Because she says you will need every set of eyes and every hand that can hold a rifle. And she is not wrong. Caleb set the pen down. Nashota. Dolly has been through enough. Do not tell me what my sister has been through. Tell her. And see how she answers. He got up. He went to the loft. He climbed the ladder. Dolly was sitting cross-legged on a pallet of blankets with a small oil lamp beside her and a Colt Dragoon disassembled in front of her. She was cleaning it. Slowly, methodically. The way a woman cleans a thing that she has decided will be a part of her life for as long as her life continues. He crouched beside her. Your sister says you will not go to the caves. My sister is correct. You should go? Why? Because you are 19. Because your ribs are still healing. Because if this goes wrong tomorrow, the children will need someone to lead them out through the wash, and you are the one they will follow. She did not look up. She set a piece of the dragoon down. She picked up another piece. They will follow their mothers. They do not need me for that. What they need me for is to make sure the men who come tomorrow do not come again next week, which means I need to be on this roof at first light with this pistol reassembled, which is what I will be. If you tell me otherwise, I will listen respectfully, and then I will do what I intended to do anyway." He looked at her a long moment. He said, quietly, "Your sisters raised you two to be like her. My sister raised me to be myself." Which turned out to look a great deal like her. He almost laughed. He did not. He put his hand on her shoulder, briefly, and climbed back down the ladder. Nashota was still in the kitchen doorway. "Well, she's on the roof at light." Nashota's corner smile, small, approving, good. The masked masquerade get her in pieces through those last 2 hours before dawn. The Apache saddles came off the horses, all 23 of them. They went under a canvas tarp behind the hay pile. Caleb walked the tarp 3 times to check it from every angle, and then he threw 2 broken plows and a coil of rusted wire on top of the canvas, so that the tarp looked like something a lazy rancher had thrown together to keep the rain off his junk. Not something worth pulling back. The warriors put on their new shirts. They put on the sombreros. They tied their hair up under the wide brims. Kaya belted his shirt at the waist with a strip of rawhide and looked, in the lantern light, like a man who had come north from the border country by way of a hard winter. 2 horses put on a sombrero so wide it hid the tribal knot in his hair. Another warrior, whose Apache name Caleb still could not pronounce, took the name of Rodrigo and answered to it as easily as if he had answered to it his whole life. The women in the shelters draped themselves in the blankets Dolly had rewoven the day before. Rebozos, long, loose, wrapped around the head and shoulders in the pattern that the women of Sonora when the wind is cold. 2 of them practiced walking with pots of water balanced on their hips, because that was the gait Caleb remembered from a trader's wife, who had once passed through the ranch with her husband, and small details matter more than large ones when a man is trying to sell a lie. Rising Eagle put on a poncho of undyed wool that Dolly had cut down for him. He kept his own moccasins because he had said quietly that his feet would not accept anything else at his age. That was fine. His feet would not be what anyone looked at. Nashota was the hardest. She stood in the front room of the house for a long time, looking at the wool blouse Caleb had laid out for her. Oversized, cut from one of his own shirts, meant to hang loose over her duskin dress, belted at the waist with a strip of red cloth. It was the disguise of a woman who had been raised in the border country and had learned English from a priest. It was not the disguise of Nashota. She looked at it. She did not touch it. Caleb was in the doorway. "You do not have to. I do have to. There is another way. You can be in the loft with the woman and the twins. There is no other way. If Blackwood does not see me, he will look for me. If he looks for me, he will find something he should not find. He must see me, and he must not see me, which means I have to become someone else for 2 hours, which I can do. I do not want to. But I can." She let her hair down. It fell past her shoulders. She had not worn it loose in front of him before. He looked away, not out of politeness, out of the understanding that this was a thing she was doing not for him, but in spite of him, and he had no place in the watching of it. She put on the blouse. She belted it. She braided the red cloth into her hair to give the whole picture the finishing detail it needed. When she turned to face him, she was not Nashota. She was somebody else. She was somebody smaller in the way she carried herself. Somebody less. Somebody who would not draw a dragoon captain's second look. It was a lie. And it was a lie she was going to spend the next 2 hours living. And Caleb understood, watching her, that this was costing her something he could not repay in coin. 2 hours. That's 2 hours. At first light, Little Bear came running from the ridge, with his eyes wide and his breath short. He was shouting a word in Apache that Caleb did not need translated, because he could see, over the boy's head, the thin line of dust rising in the east, where the road came down out of the pass, the dust of 50 dragoons. They were an hour out. Caleb Hayes tightened the strap on the ledger book. He set it on the porch rail where it would be found. He put on his brown hat. He walked out into the yard where his people, all of them, were already in their new clothes and their new names, moving through the yard with the practiced grace of men and women who had, for one more morning, agreed to become something they were not, so that the thing they truly were might live. He looked at Nashota. Here we go. The dust column in the east grew from a thin brown line to a wall. 50 riders moved inside it. The column was moving slow, which was worse, because slow meant Blackwood was not chasing. Blackwood was arriving. Blackwood was coming to stay. Caleb stood in the middle of his own yard and made himself see it the way a stranger would see it. The barn, doors open, a pile of loose hay, a broken plough leaning against the wall the way broken ploughs lean against walls all over the territory. The house smoke thin from the pipe, a wash line strung between 2 juniper posts, shirts on the line, 2 of them white cotton with the wide collars of a border country vaquero, because Caleb had cut them out of an old bedsheet an hour ago, and Dolly had hemmed the collars in the last 20 minutes. The corral, 6 horses inside, 10 more picketed at the north fence, none of them wearing Apache saddles anymore. The people were the part that scared him most. 23 Apache, wearing what they had been given in the last 2 hours. Kaya in a linen shirt of Caleb's father's that hung wrong on his shoulders. 2 horses in his wide sombrero, rising eagle on the edge of the porch with a piece of leather in his lap and a stitching awl in his hand, looking for all the world like a border country grandfather who had come north with his son's family for the season. The children were in a circle in the shade of the barn, playing a stone-passing game, playing it in Spanish because Little Bear had told them. Dolly was in the house, behind the pantry door, with the twin girls on either side of her, and the mother of the twins was in the loft, hidden under a canvas sail, because the mother of the twins had the tattoos of a Chiricahua war widow on her wrists, and no wide-brim hat in the world was going to hide those. Nashota stood at the corral. She had let her hair down. Her duskin dress was hidden under the oversized wool blouse. She looked like a woman who had been raised in the South and had learned English from a priest. She did not look like herself. The dragoons cleared the last rise at 10 in the morning. They came down the slope in a broad columns and spread out at the bottom in a way that made Caleb's mouth go dry. Because they were not riding in, they were surrounding. They were putting men on the West Ridge and the South Ridge and along the Wash, not a search party. A cordon, Blackwood himself rode at the head of the center column, bay gelding, sesame seat, same hat. Beside him rode a lieutenant Caleb did not know, and behind them, in the second rank, was a man in a captain's uniforms, whose face was thick and red, and whose horse was too small for him. Caleb walked out to meet them at the gate. He did not carry a weapon. That was the choice. A man carrying a rifle in his own yard was a man who had something to hide. A man with empty hands was a man running a legal ranch. He had left the dragoon on the workbench in the barn. He hoped it stayed there. Blackwood dismounted. He removed his hat. He looked at Caleb and then, deliberately, passed him at the yard behind. His eyes went to the wash line first, to the vaquero shirts. Something in his face registered. He looked at the corral. He saw the horses. He saw Nashota. He saw Nashota with her hair loose. His eyes stayed on her one full beat longer than they should have. Then they moved on. The captain behind him dismounted heavily. He did not remove his hat. He walked forward with the kind of confidence a man wears when he has never been told to stop. Mr. Hayes, Captain Willem Rutherford, I have been assigned by Regional Command to conduct a full territorial audit of ranches suspected of harboring hostile natives. Your ranch is on my list. Caleb kept his voice even. Assigned by whom, sir? Rutherford's face did the small, ugly thing that men's faces do when they are not accustomed to being asked to explain themselves. That is not your concern, Mr. Hayes. Then I will let it not be my concern, please. Come look at anything you like. Rutherford started with the barn. He walked through it slowly. He kicked a pile of loose hay. He did not kick it hard enough to disturb the top behind it. He walked the length of the stalls. He picked up a piece of harness and turned it in the light and put it back. He walked into the tack room. He walked out again. He came back into the yard. Blackwood had not moved. He was still standing at the gate with his hat in his hand, watching. Not the barn, the yard. The way a hawk watches a field. Rutherford moved to the corral. He looked at the horses. He walked around the outside of the pen. He came back to the picket line and studied the 10 horses tied there. He put his hand on the withers of the nearest one. He ran his thumb along the shoulder. He turned to Caleb. "These horses are unshod." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because I have not gotten to them. My smith comes out once a month. He was here 2 weeks ago. The next visit is in 2 weeks. These 10 will be shod then. The 6 in the corral have been done. Feel free to check." Rutherford considered. He walked past the picket line to the porch. He stopped at the porch step. He looked up at Rising Eagle. The old man did not from stitching. Rutherford spoke in loud English, the way men who do not speak Spanish speak to Spanish speakers. "You, old man, how long have you been on this ranch?" Rising Eagle raised his eye slowly. He looked at Rutherford. He tilted his head as if he were an old man who had heard the sound of English but was not certain what it had meant. He answered in Spanish. His Spanish was smooth as the polished wood of a chapel bench. It rolled out of him with the ease of a first language, which was almost what it was, because a man who had spent his youth fighting alongside vaqueros in the border hills before the war had rewritten the map spoke Spanish the way a rancher's dog knows a whistle. He said that he had been with the family for 4 months, that he had come north with his grandson's wife and her sister when the youngest brother had died of the cough, that the winters were kinder here, that his hands were not what they were, that he was grateful for the work. Rutherford's Spanish not good enough to catch half of it, but he caught the tone, he caught the rhythm, and he caught, most of all, the little clues that a man uses to decide when to stop asking. The way the old man's shoulders sagged the correct amount, the way his eyes went slightly cloudy on the harder words, the way he at the end, with a small formal nod, "Con permiso, senor." Rutherford's mouth pulled to one side. He turned to Blackwood. "Well, your grandfather here checks out." Blackwood did not answer. Sometimes the deepest wisdom hides behind the quietest faces. Rutherford walked the perimeter of the house necked. He went into the kitchen. He looked at the stove. He looked at the pantry door. He put his hand on the pantry latch. Caleb kept his face still. Dolly was in that pantry, with 2 toddlers. If either child cried, if either child made the smallest sound, the whole morning fell apart in one breath. Rutherford lifted the latch. He pulled the door open. Dolly sat on a small stool with a bowl of cornmeal in her lap. The twins were asleep, one against each of her ribs. Her ribs were still not fully healed. Caleb saw the small tightening at the corner of her mouth as one of the babies shifted. She did not move. She kept grinding the cornmeal. She looked up at Rutherford with a face that was so perfectly the face of a young mother who had been surprised in her work that even Caleb, who had watched her mend a bridle 3 weeks ago on his own porch, almost believed it. She said in Spanish, "Buenos dias, señor." Rutherford grunted. He closed the door. He walked back out to the yard. Caleb allowed himself to breathe, not visibly, inside. In the place inside a man where the breath goes when the moment has almost killed him and has not. Rutherford walked around the yard one more time. He looked at the wash on the line. He looked at the children playing in the shade. He turned to Blackwood. "I do not see anything. There is nothing here." Blackwood spoke for the first time since dismounting. His voice was quieter than Caleb remembered. "Then we have wasted the morning, Captain." "As I told you we would." Rutherford's neck went red. "I am not required to justify a search to a lieutenant. You are not required to. But you are welcome to explain to the colonel why we ran 50 men and 40 rations for 2 days on a lead that produced nothing." Rutherford's jaw worked. "Mount up. We are leaving." The dragoons on the west ridge signaled in. The dragoons on the south ridge signaled in. The cordon collapsed inward. Men reformed the columns. Horses stamped and blew. Rutherford mounted his too small horse and turned it toward the road. Blackwood did not mount. He walked to Caleb, holding his hat. "Walk with me, just to the gate." "That is all." Caleb walked with him. At the gate, Blackwood turned so that his back was to Rutherford and the column, and his face was in shadow from the brim of his hat. His voice was quieter now than any voice Caleb had heard from him. "Mr. Hayes." "Yes. I have seen the shirts on the wash line. I have seen the hemming. I have seen the way the old man's Spanish is one hair too clean for a peon from Chihuahua. I have seen the young woman in the pantry press her arm against the twin on her left when he almost woke up. She did it the way a mother does it, but she is not the mother, because the mother would not have known that grip on cornmeal. That is a woman who has ground cornmeal for perhaps a month." Caleb did not answer. Blackwood looked at him. "I have been a soldier for 11 years. Before that, I was a boy on a farm in Ohio. I learned to see what is in front of me before I learned to read. What is in front of me today is a ranch that is telling a story, and the story is almost good enough. It is not entirely good enough. Do you understand?" "Yes. Rutherford does not know how to see it. Rutherford sees what he expects to see. I see what is in the corner of the room." Caleb kept his eyes on Blackwood's. Blackwood said, then the sentence Caleb would carry with him the rest of his life. "If I take you in today, Mr. Hayes, I bring my wife back for a moment in my head, in the ledger of the world. It feels like justice, then the moment passes. And when it does, I have added 23 new windows to a country that already has too many. And I will lie in my bed for the rest of my life, and I will hear their crying instead of hers. And I do not know that I can carry the second sound. Because I am already carrying the first." Caleb said nothing. Because there was nothing to say, Blackwood set his hat on his head. "I will file a report stating that the search produced no findings. That is what I will file. That is what will be in the record. But listen to me carefully now. Yes, Rutherford is not going to let this go. He is a captain with a promotion to make. He came here expecting a scalp. He did not get one, and a man like Rutherford, when he does not get a scalp, does not go home empty-handed. He finds another way. He finds men who are willing to work for money instead of colors. He hires them off the record. He points them at what he cannot take with a warrant, and he calls it a raid by hostile natives afterward. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes, you have perhaps 2 weeks, perhaps 3. Not more." He touched the brim of his hat. He mounted his gelding. He rode out with the column. The dust had not settled in the yard when Nashota came to stand beside Caleb at the gate. She did not touch him. She never touched him. But she stood close enough that he could feel the heat of her arm against his own. He knew. He knew. He chose. He chose. Nashota was quiet a moment. Then she said, "Has more good men in it than I believed at the beginning of this summer." Caleb watched the last of the dust dissolve into the eastern sky. "It is my hope that we get to keep some of them." The evening after the dragoons left, the ranch did something Caleb had not seen it do in 5 years. It celebrated that there was no announcement, no plan. Nashota and one of the older women simply set out a longer table than usual on the porch and put every clay bowl the ranch owned on it. Rising Eagle sat at the head with Little Bear on one side and the 6-year-old girl on the other. 2 horses brought his fiddle out of the barn. Nobody knew he owned a fiddle. He played it badly. Nobody cared. The children danced. The women laughed. The men who had spent the morning being someone else stood at the edge of the porch light with cups of coffee in their hands and let their shoulders come down from around their ears for the first time in 24 hours. Caleb sat on the porch step and did not join. Not because he did not want to, because he did not know how. He had been alone for 5 years. The muscle a man uses to celebrate a good day among a crowd of friends had gone slack in him. He would have to build it back. Nashota sat down beside him after a while. She did not speak. She did not need to. She sat, and she watched the children, and after a long time, she said, "This was your doing, it was our doing. You should be inside the light, I will be." "Give me a nodded." She sat with him another beat. Then she got up and went to Rising Eagle and refilled the old man's cup. Caleb stayed on the porch step a while longer. He watched the fire. He watched Dolly teach the 6-year-old girl a hand-clapping game. He watched Kaya, who had made his peace with the fox decision in his own time, and was now standing at the edge of the light with a bowl of stew in his hand, arguing with 2 horses about a horse race they had run when they were boys. Kaya was smiling. It was the first time Caleb had seen him smile. Have you ever sat at the edge of a joy you helped make and understood, for the first time in your life, that you were allowed to walk into it? Caleb had not. Not until that night. He walked in slowly. He took a bowl. He sat at the table. Rising Eagle poured him coffee. Little Bear leaned against his side and did not move for the rest of the meal. 3 days later, Blackwood returned. He came alone. He rode down out of the North Wash at dusk. His bay gelding was tired. He himself looked tired in a way that was deeper than a day of riding. He did not dismount at the gate. He waited. Caleb walked out. Blackhat's spit out prelude. I received a letter yesterday from my brother in California. He is a clerk in the territorial courts. He has been looking into the death of my wife for 2 years. He does this without my asking, because he loved her too, because he does not believe grief is only mine to carry. Caleb waited. The letter contains the affidavit of a man who died last winter of pneumonia in a rooming house in the border country. The man was dying. He wanted to unburden. He gave the affidavit to a minister who was sitting with him. The minister sent it to my brother's court. My brother saw it 3 months ago. He wrote to me as soon as he was certain. He drew a folded paper out of his coat. He did not open it. He held it in his hand. Margaret was killed by 4 white men, land speculators. They had a plan to claim a stretch of titled land west of the Chiricahua by making it appear to be abandoned in an Apache raid. They needed a killing that could be blamed on Apache. They saw Margaret riding alone on the road. They took her. They dressed the scene with feathers and a broken arrow that any officer of the territory would recognize. My brother has all 4 names in this affidavit. 2 of them are dead now. 2 of them are alive. One of them owns 12,000 acres north of Las Cruces that used to belong to a family whose deed was ruled invalid the year after Margaret died. The other is a captain in the 1st Dragoons. Caleb's breath stopped in his chest. Rutherford. The 2 men stood in the yard as the light died along the west ridge, and the color of the sky went from orange to the blue that is almost black. I have hated Apache for 3 years. I have hated a whole people for something 4 white men did. I do not know how to give that hate back. It has grown into the shape of me. But I know now that I was pointing it at the wrong sky. I am sorry. For your wife. Blackwood's mouth moved. It was almost a smile. It was not. He came to me at the post last week. Rutherford. He asked me for the roster of dragoons who could be spared for a private matter. Off the record, he offered me a share of the payment. He said, "We can finish the Hayes problem without paperwork." He did not know why he was telling me. He did not know that I had a letter in my desk drawer that already had his name in it. He thought I was one of the boys when, Tuesday morning, before first light, 30 men, not dragoons, freelance. He is paying them out of the land money he has been paid for the Chiricahua acres. He wants your ranch burned to the ground and all the survivors made to look like victims of a mescalero raid, which will accomplish 2 things. It will remove any witnesses to the fact that you have been Sheltrot Apache, and it will justify a dragoon expedition into the mountains that will let him seize the Peloncillo Canyon lands, which have been under a family deed since before the war, and are, as of this letter, back in play. Caleb looked at Blackwood a long time. Why are you telling me this? Because if I do not tell you, I am carrying the second sound in my bed. The one I said I could not carry, and also because my brother closed his letter with the words, "Ezra, do not be alone with this," which is the first useful sentence a member of my family has spoken to me in 11 years. He nudged the gelding. "I will bring what men I can. I do not know how many I can bring. There are dragoons at the post who will ride with me if I ask. There are dragoons who will not. I will know by tomorrow. Do what you can with what you have. I will come with what I can bring. He turned the gelding and rode out. Caleb walked back into the yard where Nashota was already waiting, because she had been reading the whole conversation from 30 paces away in the shadow of the barn, and she had understood the shape of it without hearing a word. We have 4 days, then we have 4 days. They spent 4 days turning Hayes' ranch into a place that was not what it looked like, not a fortress. Fortresses were what men built when they wanted to be found. This was something else. Nashota and Kaya walked the ground with Rising Eagle, and the old man drew shapes in the dust with a stick and pointed, and the 3 of them decided where the men would come in and where they would break formation, and where the terrain would do half the work for them. They dug shallow rifle pits along the ridge line on the east. Not deep, only enough for a man lying flat, covered with brush. 2 horses and 3 warriors would be up there before first light, with the extra dragoons and every load of shot Caleb had. They set snares of thin rope along the wash, not to catch a man, to trip a horse. A horse tripped in the wash was a horse thrown, and a horse thrown was a rider on foot, in a place that could be shot into from 3 directions. They cleared the barn of everything that could burn easy. They wet the walls each night. They kept a barrel of water at every corner of the yard. They moved the women and the children to the caves in the North Canyon. All except Nashota, all except Dolly, all except Rising Eagle, who refused, sitting in his same spot on the porch, saying only that he had run once in his life when he was young, and had spent the rest of it trying to unremember it. He would not run again. Little Bear also refused to go. Caleb tried 3 times. The boy would not. Finally, on the night before, Caleb crouched down in front of him in the barn and looked into his eyes. Why, Little Bear did not have enough English. But he had enough. He said, "You are the second father." The words hit Caleb harder than any boot in Silver Ridge had ever hit him. The first father would want you safe. He would want me brave. Caleb had no answer to that. You will stay in the loft, behind the sacks. You will not come down, not for any reason. If someone finds you, you do not fight. You lie still, you wait. Do you promise? Little Bear nodded. Caleb pressed his forehead against the boy's for one breath. Then he stood up. He carried the boy up to the loft himself. He built a small wall of grain sacks around him. He gave him a knife small enough for his hand, not to fight with, only to know it was there. Blackwood came in the middle of the night before. He brought 14 dragoons, not 50. 14, the rest would not come. 2 would have. I did not ask them, because I did not want to know their names if this goes wrong. Caleb clasped his forearm. 14 is enough, as we will see. The attack came at 4 in the morning. They came from the South Wash and the East Ridge at the same time. Rutherford's timing was clean. 2 prongs, 15 men each. Coming in hard on horseback, with pitch torches already lit, the first prong hit the wash. The wash was full of rope. 6 horses went down inside of 10 seconds. 6 riders hit the dirt. 2 horses and his 3 warriors on the East Ridge began the fire from above. It was not a slaughter. It was a slowing. It broke the timing of the whole attack. Because the second prong, coming down the east slope, had timed themselves against the first prong hitting the yard, and the first prong was not hitting the yard. The first prong was tangled in the wash. So the second prong hesitated on the slope. That hesitation was where Blackwood's dragoons came out of the barn. 15 mounted men out of a barn is a thing that no attacker expects. Because a barn is a barn. Because a barn does not hide cavalry. Except this one did. Blackwood had ridden his 14 in the night before under a canvas across the barn floor and left them daddled, silent, breathing shallow for 6 hours. When the barn doors came open at his shout, 15 dragoons came out at a canter with carbines up. The east slope broke. Some ran. Some fought. The ones who fought did not fight long. The South Wash was harder, because Rutherford was in the South Wash. And Rutherford was not a coward, whatever else he was. He rallied his surviving 9 and pushed toward the yard on foot, using the tangled horses for cover. They reached the corral. They cut the ropes. They loosed the picket line to scatter Caleb's horses. Then they came for the house. Kaya met them at the corner of the porch. Kaya was a knife in one hand and a dragoon in the other. He fired the dragoon into the chest of the first man over the fence. He struck the second man down. Then a rifle went off from 10 paces, and Kaya went down against the porch post with his shirt turning red. Nashota cried out a word Caleb had not heard her use before. It was not English. It was not the English kind of word. She came out of the pantry window with her bow. She loosed 3 arrows in 6 seconds. 3 men fell. She loosed a 4th. She missed. She loosed a 5th. She did not miss. Dolly was on the roof. She had a Colt dragoon in each hand. She was very good with both. Caleb was in the doorway of the house with Rising Eagle behind him. 2 men rushed the door. He shot the first one in the chest. The second one grabbed him around the middle and drove him into the frame. Caleb hit the man 3 times in the side of the head with the butt of the dragoon. The man went down. Caleb reloaded on one knee. He heard something crack in the loft above him. Little Bear, he looked up. The loft ladder was on fire. One of Rutherford's men had thrown a torch through the north loft window. The dry hay had caught. And Caleb could hear, through the roar of the flame, the small sound of a boy trying not to cry. Nashota was already moving. She dropped her bow. She went up the outside of the barn like a woman going up a tree, feet against the boards, hand on the ridgepole, and she was through the loft window before the fire could reach it from inside. Caleb ran for the barn. A man stepped out from behind the porch and shot him. The bullet took him in the meat of the left shoulder and turned him half around. He fell. He got up. He shot the man. The man died standing. He kept running. He reached the barn. He kicked the doors open. Flame rolled out over him. He went in low under the smokes. Because a barn on fire lets you breathe for the first 2 feet off the ground, and after that it kills you. He saw Nashota on the loft edge. She had Little Bear in her arms. She was passing him down through the smoke into the empty air over Caleb's outstretched hands. He caught the boy. He turned. He ran. He was 3 paces from the door when the burning crossbeam came down behind him. He felt the heat of it on the back of his neck. He heard Nashota land somewhere behind him with a sound that was not a good sound. He did not turn, because if he turned, he would drop the boy. He carried Little Bear through the door and put him in Dolly's arms and ran back into the barn. Nashota was on one knee. Her left leg was under a piece of the beam. The beam was on fire. Caleb, he lifted the beam. He did not know that he could. He did not think about it. He got his good shoulder under it and he pushed it off her, and the skin of his hands went with it, and he did not care. He got her up. She could not stand on the leg. He carried her out. The yard was quieter now. Blackwood's men had finished the east slope. They were coming down at the south wash at a trot. Rutherford's survivors were finished. Rutherford himself was on the ground beside the corral. He was still alive. He had been shot in the belly. He was not going to be alive long. Blackwood dismounted. He walked to Rutherford. He did not speak to him. He picked up Rutherford's revolver from the dirt beside him. He tucked it into his own belt. He looked at Caleb. He will die of the wound. He does not need a bullet from me. Caleb nodded. He set Nashota down against the porch step. Dozotti was already there. With water, with cloth. Dolly was already moving. Kaya was on the porch beside them. Kaya was gone. Nashota touched his face with her free hand. She did not weep. Nashota was not the weeping kind, but she touched his face for a long time, and her lips moved in a word that was not English, and Caleb understood it anyway, because a farewell has the same shape in every tongue. He walked away from the porch, because the moment belonged to her, not to him. He walked to the corner of the barn. He put his good hand against the wall. He put his forehead against his hand. Have you ever won a fight and known? In the same breath, that winning had cost you the piece of yourself you would miss the most. Caleb had not, until that morning. The sun came up over the east ridge 1 hour later. Blackwood's dragoons buried Rutherford's men in the wash where they had fallen. It was not honor, it was practicality. The ground was hard everywhere else. They buried Rutherford himself at the edge of the yard. Blackwood said no words. Blackwood said nothing at all that morning. Kaya they carried to the cottonwood tree, to the place where the 3 flat stones had stood alone for 5 years. Rising Eagle sang the words. Dolly held her sister. Nashota held her cousin's hand until it went cold and would not warm again. Caleb dug the grave himself with his good arm until Blackwood took the shovel from him and finished it. They set a 4th stone beside the other 3. Little Bear stood at Caleb's hip through the whole of it. His poor small hand was in Caleb's larger one. He did not let go. Blackwood came to Caleb that evening on the porch step. He put a small canvas outside on the wood between them. Caleb opened it. Inside was a silver pocket watch on a chain. Caleb looked at Blackwood. I rode to Silver Ridge yesterday afternoon while your ranch was being made ready. I called on a pawnbroker named Finch. He remembered the watch. He remembered the ring. The ring had been sold on to a jeweler in Suscruces last month, and I could not recover it in time. But the watch, I could. It is yours. It should not have left your pocket. Caleb held the watch in his hand. The engraving on the back read, in his father's cramped hand, to Nathaniel Hayes, from his father, 1817, and Caleb closed his fingers around it. Thank you. I resigned my commission this morning. I will not go back to the post. There is a small parcel of land 2 ridges north of yours. It has been abandoned since the winter. The prior owner died in the smallpox. I am going to file on it tomorrow. I will be your neighbor, if you will have me. Caleb looked at him. I would be glad of it. Blackwood nodded. The enemy is not across the border. Sometimes he is wearing the same uniform as you. I have spent 3 years riding at the head of a column and calling the wrong horizon by the wrong name. I do not know how to make 3 years back, but I know how to spend the next 30 differently, and I would like to spend them here. Caleb reached out with his good hand. He put it on Blackwood's shoulder, then spend them. A year passed on that ranch. The barn was rebuilt. Larger this time, because there was more to hold. The house grew a room, then another. Because there were more sleeping under the roof, the wash filled in with grass in the spring, and the memory of what had been in it went into the memory of the ridge, and the ridge kept it, because that is what ridges do. They keep. 23 had come. 22 remained. Then, in the fall, a young Chiricahua woman named Ash arrived with her brother and a mule, then a Pima family, then 2 old widows from a broken mescalero band who had heard, somehow, along the way that a hidden network of Apache had gathered, and were saved from having to say what they had seen. By the end of the 2nd summer, the ranch was 40 souls, and the ledger book had 40 names on it, and the papers Blackwood helped Caleb file in Las Cruces gave every one of those names a legal footing that would take a dozen lawyers a dozen years to unwind. Grief is a debt you can never pay off, but you can share it with others who understand it. Caleb had not known that. He knew it now. Blackwood built his cabin 2 ridges north. He came for supper on Sundays. He and Rising Eagle played a game with stones on the porch that neither of them ever explained, and neither of them ever seemed to finish. Little Bear learned to ride a colt of his own. He called Caleb father in Apache first, in English second, in Spanish third. He used all 3, depending on the day. You do not lose family, you just make room for new ones. On a Sunday in the 2nd summer, Caleb stood on the porch step at dusk. Nashota was on his left. She still walked with a small hitch. She had told him 6 weeks after the fire that she preferred the hitch, that it reminded her which morning she had chosen to keep breathing. Dolly was on his right. Dolly had begun teaching 2 of the youngest children how to read English out of a book she had found in a chest in the loft. Dolly did not believe the stories in it, but Dolly believed in the letters. And the letters, she said, were a kind of arrow that could be aimed at a great many things. The sun went down over the West Ridge. Little Bear ran through the yard on his colt, shouting in 3 languages. A man's honor is not measured by what he takes. It is measured by what he refuses to take. Caleb's father had said that once at a supper table in a farmhouse in Kentucky when Caleb was 7. Caleb had not understood it then. He had carried it in the back of his head for 25 years without understanding it. He understood it now. He looked out at the ridge where the 4th stone stood. He said very softly, so that only the wind could hear, "Father, I have found a family. It is not the family you gave me. But it is a family. The wind carried it. The wind carries everything. Eventually, how many good men do we lose to hate that was never even ours to begin with?" Caleb had asked himself that question every day of the last year, sitting on that porch step, and he did not have the whole answer yet, and he did not think he ever would. But he had a piece of it, and a piece was enough for one lifetime. He turned. He went inside. The lamp was lit. The supper was on the table. His people were waiting. If you are watching this, you have probably lost someone too. A father, a mother, a child. A whole life you thought you would live. Tell me in the comments who you lost. And more than that, tell me who found you afterward. Because someone did. Somebody always does. That is the one thing about this country of ours that has stayed true from the summer of 1850 until the day you are hearing these words. There is always someone coming down the road behind you, and you get to decide whether you walk toward them or away. Caleb Hayes walked toward them. Every day for the rest of his life he walked toward them. And the ranch in the Red Rock Valley, 3 ridges south of the road that used to be a border and was no longer, kept its light on.